Show me what it looks like to run like a girl.
Do girls run like a girl? Do they earn like a girl?
There's one thing that just about every single job in America has in common. Dudes get paid more for doing it.
Especially white dudes.
We're still fighting some of the same battles we did a half century ago.
What is fair?
Raise the minimum wage.
What's fair on the internet?
A major shakeup in how the internet providers can control what we all see online.
How unfair is Hollywood? Why doesn't she make enough money?
There's new fallout from the Sony Pictures cyber attack.
Some Americans do have much more than others. That's not fair, but that's our show tonight.
And now, John Stossel.
What is fair? In America today, some people are really rich. That guy, for example, he has more than 1,000 times the money than I have. That's not fair. This guy's also rich and better looking and more famous than me. This woman is richer and better looking than most everyone. That's unfair. I could go on. Obviously, we are all different and unequal. And when it comes to unequal money, politicians want to do something about it. The president says,
I believe this is the defining challenge of our time.
The next president says this.
As Secretary of State, I saw the way extreme inequality has corrupted other societies.
Okay, I don't know that she's the next president. Finally, here's how a British guy, who these days seems to speak for young opinion in America, portrays American inequality.
Okay. As always, we have two drawings. First up, the draw for people with inherited wealth. Okay, so now the lottery for those who were born poor. Okay.
Is that America? The rich party and the poor are stuck at the bottom? Yes, says Alexis Goldstein. She works for a group called the Other 98%. She also joined the Occupy Wall Street protests. George Mason University economist Garrett Jones says she's wrong. Garrett, I mean, why? Donald Trump's kids, Paris Hilton's siblings, they're born with an advantage in life. That's not fair.
And I was born with an advantage, too. Being born in the United States of America is one of the least fair things that ever happened to me. Being born with great parents, great thing that happened to me, totally unfair. The question is whether government policies that try to fix this actually make things better or worse.
You say they make things better.
I do. And look, we're living in a situation where corporations have profits that are higher than they've been in 85 years. We have workers that have wages that are lower than they've been in 65 years.
Well, that's absolutely not true. But
that is true. But let me continue. 40% of bank tellers in New York State are forced to rely on government assistance just to scrape by. And that's wrong in a country where we have record corporate profits.
And government should then take from the corporations and rich people and just give it to poor people, have more programs for poor people.
If we raise the minimum wage in this country, workers are immediately going to go and spend that money in the economy, and that is going to stimulate the economy.
But one of the things that makes people least happy, according to regular economics and psych surveys, is being unemployed. So even if raising the minimum wage only costs a few jobs, and it probably costs a lot of jobs, but even if it only costs a few, you're concentrating a lot of misery on a small group of people in the hope
that raising the minimum wage doesn't cost jobs. Even if you have a county that overlaps two different states,
it's absorbed
by studies like Berkeley, the University of New Mexico. We've seen.
But the vast majority of economists just all agree.
That's not true.
Economists at the Federal Reserve and California Irvine, 85% of studies in the last 20 years show raising the minimum wage causes job loss.
The most recent studies look at counties that are in two different states. One state raises the minimum wage, one state doesn't. The state that raises the minimum wage does not lose jobs to the state that is directly next to it, because the company is able to absorb those losses with higher productivity because morale is boosted. People are happier. They're not looking over their shoulder to find a job. If that were
true, businesses would go ahead and just do it on their own.
Walmart just did.
Walmart totally
just did.
That's fantastic. Yeah. That's great news.
If this works, why don't we raise it to $100 an hour? then everybody would be rich.
Well, I'm glad that you have some good ideas, John. I'm excited to hear you that you want to put more money in the pocket of hardworking Americans.
But that wouldn't cost any jobs. It's not going to hurt anybody.
Well, I think that people are proposing $15 an hour is a start, but you can also look at the MIT calculator. They have a state-by-state calculator for what a living wage would be in all of those states, and I think that's a good place to start.
Here's what Senator Elizabeth Warren said last year.
I can't believe I have to say this in 2014, but someone has to say it and say it again and say it again. We need equal pay for equal work. We need to raise the minimum wage. We need to address the cost of student loans.
So, Alexis, this is your person. You support all this, right?
I actually think that Senator Warren doesn't go far enough when she's talking about student debt. She wants to make the cost of student debt lower. I think we can make public higher education free.
Where are you going to get the money?
Here's what you do. You take the $8.6 billion that currently goes to grants for for-profit schools. You redirect it to public higher education.
But, subsidies for college is redistributing from the average person in America to the top. Because college graduates are some of the most fortunate people in America.
But we promise people that if you get an education, if you get a vocational degree, then you will make a difference in your life and you can succeed. And we are not seeing that today. We are seeing people going into for-profit schools.
And throwing more money at it's going to make it better?
Because people are going to for-profit colleges and getting saddled with tens of thousands of dollars in student debt.
The idea that redistributing wealth to college graduates is a way to actually reduce inequality, that just isn't going to work as math.
But we're redistributing wealth now. We're just redistributing it to the top. The Cato Institute, the right-wing think tank Cato Institute, said that corporate subsidies account for $100 billion a year. So we
all agree on that. Let's get rid of the corporate subsidies. There's some other stuff we can agree on. Get rid of corporate welfare, which includes the subsidies and the bailouts, like too big to fail, special deals for banks and rescuing those that fail, limiting defense spending, libertarians and the left tend to agree on that.
Yes.
And we shouldn't jail so many people and have a ridiculous drug war. But beyond that, there is so much where I think you're just out to lunch here. The idea that the poor are doing worse. Even the Brookings director says the top 1%, up 200%. But incomes have increased among all groups in the past 30 years. 40% for the middle fifth, 49% for the bottom fifth.
It's just hard for me to imagine if I could take a time machine and I knew I was going to be in the bottom fifth in the America of today versus the bottom fifth of America in 1970 or 1960. It's just hard to imagine that anybody would want to take that time machine into the past.
The bottom fifth of America today is making $15,500 a year before government subsidies. I don't think anyone thinks that that's the American dream. But the other issue here is non-defense discretionary spending is at its lowest level than it's been in decades. And you guys are talking about, we're throwing all this money at education.
Yes, it's
but
only
we're not. It's a tiny bit compared to where it was before. And so I think you're sort of fighting over peanuts instead of talking about what I totally agree with you, which is that we should cut defense spending and we should end the subsidies to the biggest banks. We can totally agree on that.
You want to cut defense spending altogether?
Maybe not altogether, but pretty close.
Well, I wouldn't feel very safe then. Garrett, I would think in a free society, some people will just do much better than others.
Yes.
And you're saying just leave it that way?
The
way it is?
Indeed. The question is, can real government policies, practical government policies, make an improvement? The biggest inequality, the biggest source of unfairness that I can think of is the fact that where you end up in life depends mostly on where you're born.
Here's something else Senator Warren likes to say about working families.
For a generation, they've been squeezed until they are gasping for breath.
Gasping for breath? Poor people are richer than they used to be.
That doesn't mean that they're making a living wage, and that doesn't mean that they don't have to rely on government assistance in order to survive. 300,000 workers in California have to rely on the state medical plan just to scrape by.
Thank you, Garrett. Alexis will not solve this here. Now, Alexis wants government to step in and fix things. I say when it does, it usually makes things worse for the poor. Here's one way government does that.
Chuck has an idea. I'm going to fix computers in my garage and sell them for low prices.
Chuck, in Milwaukee, starting a business in your home means you can't work in your garage, can't have any employees, can't have any signs, and can't take deliveries.
What?
Unless you come up with the money for a commercial lease right away, you won't be starting your business at all.
Because government wants orderly neighborhoods, they create zoning rules that make it hard for anyone to start a business. Especially if you're poor, you have to be rich enough to hire lawyer fixers. Patrice Lee of Generation Opportunity, a group that fights for opportunity for young people, says there are lots of ways the government hurts young people, especially minorities and poor people. So beyond zoning, list some.
Hairdressers or hair braiders.
They have to get licenses to do basic, simple things.
Absolutely. In some states, if you want to be a barber, you're going to spend 1,500 hours of education just trying to learn how to cut hair. On top of that, you're going to schools that may cost you $10,000 to $20,000 just to kind of get that certification. So imagine for a poor person, and especially people from communities of color who are coming out, especially with a criminal record, that's a huge hurdle to overcome, and especially when you have other opportunities cut away from you.
Sometimes the criminal record makes it impossible to get the license.
It does.
And so many professions, interior decorators, landscape workers, makeup artists, animal trainer, teaching assistants, travel agents. I mean, thousands of dollars in fees.
We need the private sector being able to provide those jobs, and we need entrepreneurs out there removing the regulation so that they can take their ideas and passion to the marketplace.
Higher ed?
We have over $1 trillion worth of student loan debt as a young person. We're graduating with that amount, and that is because the government is subsidizing student loans. And it's a vicious cycle between
inviting you.
Free money.
It's free money.
Absolutely. Come and take free money, and then the schools know that as a parent or a student, you can get that money, so they will continue to raise their cost.
For the younger kids, you say the government helping K-12 education hurts poor people?
So we, again, throw money at K through 12 education. $600 billion, I believe, that we spend on K through 12 education, and yet our children are turning out, they're undereducated. And even when
it's more than 12,000 per student now.
Which is ridiculous, and our students are not prepared to enter into the job force. But even worse than that, when we're also, because of zero tolerance policies, we are punishing students for, small infractions, and that feeds them right into the juvenile justice system, and then feeds them into the larger criminal justice system. And as a child of color, you're more likely to be penalized more harshly than even a white student. In large part driven by the war on drugs, we have mandatory minimums that are meant to, create some sort of baseline of punishment. But in fact, they trap people of color in higher punishments and sentences than they need to. And then you get out, and unfortunately, you have no opportunities to be able to, provide for yourself and your family.
And yet, all these government plans or punishments or programs are meant to make life more fair.
It's well intended, but just because there's good intention doesn't mean they're going to be good outcomes. And that's what we're seeing. And a lot of this is the idea of just throwing money at a problem, when in fact private solutions are the best options. So when we look at mandatory minimums, let's eliminate them together. And then let's redefine what we call criminal in this nation. If you don't know, the average American has committed 3 felonies in a given day. So that means both you and I are already felons.
No, because we're pretty active. We probably did 6 or 7.
You're right.
Thank you, Patrice. To join this discussion, please follow me on Twitter at FBN Stossel. Use that hashtag equality, or like my Facebook page so you can post on my wall. We want to know what you think. Coming up, I'm told America isn't fair to women.
Show me what it looks like to run like a girl.
My hair. Oh, my God.
Before Obamacare passed, women paid more for health insurance than men. Was that fair? No, said our politicians. Republicans, too. It was one Obamacare fix many of them backed. As a result,
no woman can ever be charged more just because she's a woman.
That seems fair, but it's not. Insurance is supposed to cover costs, actual costs. Women go to the doctor more often, much more often. In fact, the CDC says twice as often as men. Women should pay more. But I'm wrong, say liberals like Tamara Holder. Why? Why should you pay more?
Well, I shouldn't pay more. It should be paid across the board equally. Women and men should have the same amount of insurance. All men are created equal, John.
So should you pay more than you pay now for car insurance and life insurance? Because you pay less now.
Right. Should I pay?
Should that be equalized?
Well, remember, it's a case-by-case basis. I don't drive.
Even more reason. Women in general.
Yeah, I'm silent to the fact as to whether men should pay more or less in car insurance, because people don't drive. Some people drive, some people don't. Some people own cars.
Well, if you don't drive, you don't have to have car insurance.
Everybody needs health insurance. Everybody needs care at some point in their life. But does that mean that women should be paid less because they go to the doctor more? Or women should
let's
pay
talk
more?
about, you're bringing up pay. That's the big controversy over gender inequality. The fact that we men usually make more money. I make $1, you women make 77 cents.
Right.
There's one thing that just about every single job in America has in common. Dudes get paid more for doing it.
It's time to have wage equality once and for all.
Women deserve equal pay for equal work.
Is it not possible that women make less or are less likely to be the CEO because you make other choices in life?
Oh, like having a baby.
Like having a baby, like caring more about family, like not being so work-driven to work all the time like some of these tech nerds do?
No. I think that women make less because our society thinks that we're worth less. That's why.
Sexism. That's the only reason.
No, I don't think it's sexism. We've come a long way, but we have a long way to go. There are jobs, most of the jobs, let's see, another thing. 19 out of 20 of the most common occupations for women, men make more in. Men are getting paid more
Maybe they
in these
work
occupations.
harder and don't take time off or are willing to take bigger risks. I mean, the Department of Labor, the government.
Are you really saying that women don't take bigger risks and they don't work as hard as men?
Yeah, they don't go to oil fields in North Dakota as often as men do.
So should they be paid less, though?
They should be paid what the market says they should be paid.
Right, but the market, it should also be regulated, and the market should not be, well, we need to make sure that there is equality. All men are created equal. The Declaration of Independence says that. And I know you believe because it says all men, it means men, but it really means women too.
Let's move on. During the last Super Bowl, one company got attention by running this ad.
Show me what it looks like to run like a girl.
My hair.
Show me what it looks like to fight like a girl. Now throw like a girl.
Aww.
This is a stereotype, admittedly, but isn't that okay? Because there's some truth to that. We are different.
Throwing like a girl is an okay stereotype. I want to see you fight like a girl because I know you're a big MMA fan, and Ronda Rousey, I think she would really kick your butt.
I'm sure she would, but I'm not a mixed martial arts fighter. She couldn't kick the butt of the man in her weight class, Dylan Shaw.
Are you sure about that?
Her own mother says she shouldn't fight men.
Her mother says she can't win. So
her mother is a world judo champion. She knows men and women are different.
If I listened to all the things that my mom said I couldn't do, I wouldn't be here today.
Let's play the rest of the commercial.
Show me what it looks like to run like a girl. Throw like a girl. Fight like a girl.
The implication is we're not different. We are different.
Of course we're different.
Unequal.
Of course we're different, but this throwing like a girl has a negative connotation. It's an insult if you say to a boy, throw like a girl. That is an insult, and so it's taking a term and turning it around.
Now it's not an insult because girls can throw just as well as boys?
No.
You can't.
No, I know. I can't throw a ball like Peyton Manning. I know that. However, you're not telling women that they can throw the same. You're simply saying that these negative connotations need to go. Young women should be empowered. I can equally be empowered.
No question. And women now dominate higher education. Master's degrees, 60% go to women. In all education, girls dominate the chorus, student government, the yearbook, dance classes. Should government intervene and push guys into these activities?
No, but if a man does go into dancing, he shouldn't be paid less.
Thank you.
We're equal.
We are in many ways. Thank you, Tamara Holder. Coming up, inequality in Hollywood. Also, a black man tells government, please stop helping us. One group has clearly received unfair treatment in America, and that's blacks. First slavery, then laws like Jim Crow that segregated blacks, and now, well, now it's not so clear. Is America still unfair to blacks? Many say yes, and they want government to do more to help blacks. But Manhattan Institute senior fellow Jason Riley says no. He wrote a book titled, Please Stop Helping Us. So why do you say stop?
No Great Society program has ever been able to replicate the success that blacks are having prior to the implementation of that program than versus what was happening after that program was implemented.
Before the war on poverty began, blacks were lifting themselves out of poverty.
Sure.
And more were married, more owned businesses. Then the war on poverty starts. And you can see the chart here. There was great progress for about 7 years, and then progress stopped because these programs taught people to be dependent.
Open-ended welfare policies do not help people develop a work ethic. Paying women to have more children and keep the father away from the home puts exactly the wrong incentives in place if you want a group to rise.
They didn't pay women to have more children or keep the father away.
Well, they rewarded women who had more children and penalized them if the father stayed in the home. So in effect, I think they were doing exactly that. But even if you go back further, between 1940 and 1960, black poverty in America fell by 40 percentage points. Now, it continued to fall throughout the 60s and 70s and 80s, but at a much slower rate, at best.
Despite
those policies
all
put in
these
place.
laws,
Yes.
we have the Civil Rights Act of '64, Voting Rights Act of '65, the Fair Housing Act of '68, Equal Credit Opportunity Act, the Equal Educational Opportunities Act.
Right.
Congress being very busy.
We went from trying to ensure equal opportunity to trying to ensure equal outcomes. And the laws you just named there were put in place, again, aimed at discrimination. And we thought if we handled that, we'd get equal outcomes. We'd get proportionate outcomes. It didn't happen. And our emphasis on pretending wherever we don't see proportional outcomes that something must be amiss, I think, is where we've gone wrong. You don't see equal outcomes, not in the U.S., not outside of the U.S., not in the past,
and that's okay?
Not anywhere.
Big disparities? It's unfair?
Well, it just shows the limits of government benevolence. There's only so much the government can do beyond providing a level playing field. Then it's up to a group to take personal responsibility, to take advantage of those opportunities. And that's what hasn't happened in too many cases in black America, due in part to a lot of policies that have been put in place to help.
And you would include affirmative action in that?
Oh, absolutely include affirmative action. Blacks were entering the professions at a faster rate prior to the Great Society programs and affirmative action efforts to help them. Blacks were increasing their levels of education, both in absolute terms and relative to whites. Nothing that the Great Society did has been able to replicate what was going on prior to the implementation of these programs in terms of the rate of progress.
And yet the public supports these programs, affirmative action. 63% think it's good. Most whites, 84% of blacks.
When the University of California system ended racial preferences in college admissions back in 1996, black college graduation rates throughout the University of California system went up by more than 50%, including in some of the more difficult disciplines like math and science and engineering.
Because people were more likely to go to colleges that were suitable for them.
Exactly. There was a mismatch problem going on. But the left doesn't care about that, because they care about those kids are in place to provide diversity on campus. Whether they graduate is a secondary concern at best to the left.
But why is it so popular? This is the left and the right supporting it.
Because good intentions have come to trump everything else. Data, facts, it does not matter. As long as you feel good and can pat yourself on the back for trying really hard and having the best intentions in mind, it's okay.
Thank you, Jason Riley. Up next, Hollywood celebrities love to talk about equality, but they are hypocrites. Did you watch the Oscars last month? The moment the media called their favorite was when actress Patricia Arquette used her acceptance speech to demand wage equality once and for all for women. Got the biggest applause of the night. Gee, the celebrities are so into equality. But Kelly Serio says they're not. They're hypocrites. Kelly covers Hollywood for the website Big Hollywood. What do you mean they're hypocrites?
Take a look at Sean Penn and Alec Baldwin, right? Both of these men routinely make comments, disparaging comments towards minorities, yet they're given a free pass. They don't have a trouble finding work, or they don't seem to, right?
And they're viewed as heroes of the left. Well, what disparaging comments about minorities have they made?
Before the Oscars the other night, Sean Penn, as he was announcing the winner for Birdman, he said, "Who gave this guy a green card?"
It was a joke.
Of course it was a joke, but can you imagine if a conservative would have said that? What would have happened? Instead, they laughed it off, right? Free pass.
So gender inequality is one of the big areas, obviously, from all the applause. In this web clip, Mad Men actress Christina Hendricks makes this complaint.
Did you know that almost 70% of the minimum wage workforce is female, but only 15% of our Fortune 500 CEOs are?
But in Hollywood, it turned out that Amy Adams and Jennifer Lawrence made less money than their male counterparts in American Hustle. Jeremy Renner, and he's not a big star, Christian Bale, Bradley Cooper, they are.
These women arguably are working just as hard as the men. Why are they not entitled to equal pay? These top executives for minor and major film studios, 100% white, 94% male. These guys are the ones in charge of financing, greenlighting all these films. They're controlling the narrative. You're telling me that, women aren't entitled to equal pay?
Well, I don't think anybody's entitled to equal pay. Everybody should be paid whatever the market would bear. But some emails got leaked that revealed executives saying the women didn't ask for it. They didn't push as hard.
Yeah, she said, I'm not going to give them something they didn't ask for. If they, I'm not going to give them more money, basically, in a nutshell. But there have been more and more stars fighting back at that, demanding I'm going to be paid just as much as my male counterpart. And it's been happening more and more.
And Reese Witherspoon started a production company for only women.
Yes, she did.
And that's a much better way to change things than to ask government to do it.
Absolutely. She even said, speaking out against something, it's wonderful, but she believes doing something about it says more.
These stars are pretty influential. Leo DiCaprio has 12 million Twitter followers, which is huge, I would think. And then I see Lady Gaga, 44 million. Katy Perry, 66 million. So when they say illiterate things, it reaches people.
Yes, it does.
You wrote, DiCaprio, who spent the summer traveling around the world in his private jet, stopped in New York on Sunday for the People's Climate March.
Yes, he announced he was going to travel around the world doing good for the environment in his private jet. So, what message is that sending to everyone else? He cares about the environment, yet he's riding around on yachts, traveling around the world on his private jet.
Gwyneth Paltrow, what'd she do?
Okay, so Gwyneth Paltrow, this is one of my favorites that I wrote about. She hosted a fundraiser in her Brentwood estate for President Obama, and it was there that she said that she wanted the president to possess the power to pass the things he needed to pass. One of those, important to her as a working mother, was wage equality. So the holidays come around, and Gwyneth releases her annual holiday gift guide on her blog that basically recommends what holiday gifts. So on that list, there was a vase on there. So can you imagine?
A $1,000 watch, a $4,000 Valentino canvas bag, a juicer that sells for almost $5,000.
And people on Twitter were like, yeah, Gwyneth, let me get right on that vase. You got it, girl.
Finally, racial equality. Hollywood tries hard to be racially sensitive. They're America's moral compass on issues like race, except
there's new fallout from the Sony Pictures cyber attack. Sony executive Amy Pascal and producer Scott Rudin chatting before they went to a fundraiser with President Obama in 2013.
They were guessing what would be his favorite movie, and it was between...
It was between The Butler, and they said, I bet he likes Kevin Hart. This is coming from Hollywood's leadership. This is what's going on behind closed doors that people aren't even seeing.
Thank you, Kelly Serio. After the break, Government says the internet isn't fair. So, government is going to fix it.
A major shakeup in how the internet providers can control what we all see online.
For once in your lives, focus your indiscriminate rage in a useful direction. Seize your moment, my lovely trolls. Turn on Caps Lock and fly, my pretties.
That was comedian John Oliver last year urging his viewers to write the FCC to support net neutrality, plan to have government make sure the internet is fair to everyone. So many of his fans went to the FCC's website, the website crashed. As a result, the FCC has now passed a net neutrality rule. Well, actually, I'm not sure Oliver was the reason. There was this other guy who got involved. He told the FCC, create new rules. So now they have.
A major shakeup in how the internet providers can control what we all see online.
And you thought your cable company was a nightmare. Just wait till you're on hold with Washington.
Well, that's Neil Cavuto's spin. He suggests the internet will be smothered by government. And I think he's probably right. Though most of the media seems to like Obama's new plan. Here's how NBC explains it.
Think of the internet as a sort of congested superhighway with most of the wider fast lanes taken up by big fat trucks carrying content like Amazon, Netflix, and Hulu. The FCC's new rule will mean those big companies will not be able to pay to dominate the fast lanes. The new FCC rules will also prohibit internet service providers like Verizon, AT&T, and Comcast from slowing down internet traffic and blocking access to competitors.
Yes, no blocking, no slowing down. It sounds great. I'd be more certain if we were allowed to read the 300-page rule, except they wouldn't allow us to see it. Of course, the FCC commissioners are able to read it, and fortunately one of them joins us now. Republican Commissioner Ajit Pai voted against the new rule. Why?
First and foremost, there is no problem with the internet. The internet isn't broken today, as most of us who rely on it know. Secondly, decisions about how the internet works are now going to be made by bureaucrats and politicians instead of by engineers and innovators. And third, and most importantly to me, putting on my hat as a consumer, this is going to be a bad deal for the American consumer, especially rural and low-income Americans. It's going to mean higher prices for broadband. It's going to mean slower speeds, fewer competitive choices. This is a massive shift in favor of government control.
But you make it sound like you and your fellow commissioners are just out of control and you're going to jump all over the internet. The other commissioners say, oh, we're going to have a light hand. We're just going to punish somebody who does something wrong.
Do you trust Washington bureaucracy to get internet policy right? And we can only look abroad to places like Europe where utilities, where the internet is treated like a utility, to see that consumers are worse off, even though, and especially because, I would argue, government is so actively involved.
And yet there are so many smart people in the internet world who are just all for this. Small web companies like Tumblr and Etsy support government intervention. Etsy says the internet is built on the principle of openness. This democratic access allows Etsy sellers to compete with much bigger brands. The implication is without net neutrality, somebody will cut them off.
I certainly respect what they have done to build up their companies, but the problem is what they don't understand is that the platform has to exist to allow them to innovate. And if we adopt these heavy-handed regulations that are going to dissuade some of the broadband providers from building their networks or upgrading their networks, then future Etsys, future Tumblrs simply won't have enough bandwidth, so to speak, to be able to deliver some of those innovative services to the American consumer. And I think that's why you're seeing a lot of companies like Tumblr and Netflix now saying, whoa, these rules might not be exactly what we bargained for.
Also opposing you are Facebook, Google, Netflix, and President Obama. They say the internet is a public good and should be regulated like one.
I could not disagree more, and the best case I can make is the 2-decade experience we've had with the internet. It has thrived without the heavy hand of government regulation. Even if there were a problem with the internet, which there isn't, the common carrier regulations we just adopted are going to make it a lot tougher for broadband to be deployed to some of the most difficult to reach parts of this country. So ironically enough, the regulations we just passed, well, because if you are a provider and you have a limited amount of capital and the government says now we are going to, for the first time, micromanage how you deploy your network, work, what service plans you're going to be allowed to offer, and all kinds of different business practices might be under scrutiny now, you're going to be a little more careful about deploying some of that or spending some of that capital to build out your network. You might not build it at all.
It ends the 2 decades of permissionless innovation. Now you have to say, Mother, may I? And that slows everything down.
Absolutely right, and I think some of the innovators who are going to, who have been pushing us to adopt these heavy-handed net neutrality regulations, ultimately might find themselves swept up in this regulatory vortex, where the agency, as a referee, might throw a flag on some innovative business plan they want to pursue.
Thank you, Commissioner Ajit Pai. Coming up, why freedom sometimes is not fair, and also just how clueless is Al Sharpton.
The top 1% in this country pays very much less than 10%, very much less than 5%.
If fair means equal, freedom isn't fair. When people are free, some who are smarter or luckier get very rich. Globalization multiplies the effect. As a result, today, America's richest 1% own 1/3 of America's wealth. 1% owns 1/3. To many, that's just wrong, but why? Some say it's because the rich get rich at the expense of poor people, but they say that because they don't understand free markets. They see capitalism as a zero-sum game. If he gets rich, he must have taken something from me. It's as if the economy is this pie that's already on the table. If I, or Bill Gates, say, take this big piece, that means you get less. But this is absurd. Bill Gates did take a huge slice of pie, but he didn't take it from us. By expanding Microsoft, he baked 1 million new pies. He made all of us better off. Now, I admit if someone gets rich through political connections, government handouts, or special privileges, that is unfair. Frederick Bastiat's correct when he called it legal plunder. But there's nothing unfair when people make big money through productive work. People have a range of talents and ambitions. Some serve consumers better than others. Then they get really rich. The difference in wealth between rich and poor has grown. But why is that a problem? So what if the rich get richer? If the poor don't get poorer? Progressives claim they did, but it's not true. Poor people's incomes grew at a slower rate, but they did grow. Today, poor Americans live lives that rich people lusted for a century ago. Thanks to free markets, even poor people have access to flush toilets, air conditioning, fruit in winter, things kings didn't have a century ago. We have them now thanks to free markets. Now, what do progressives want to do about inequality? They say, well, keep the innovation, keep the progress, but have government make us more equal. But it's been tried, and it's worse. Look at Cuba, Venezuela. Socialism, government-forced equality leaves everybody poor. Then how about a middle ground, they say? Have government take a higher percentage from the rich and give that to the poor like they do in much of Europe. Progressives are big on that, although they're often clueless about what the rich already pay in taxes. Al Sharpton once told me this.
The top 1% in this country pays very much less than 10%, very much less than 5%.
So what's fair? The top 1% should pay 10% of America's income taxes? 20%?
No, they should pay somewhere around 15%. They don't pay 5%. Anybody could see that as unequal and unfair.
So they should pay 15%, he says. And the richest 1% now pay less than 10%. Then he said they pay less than 5%. But that's ridiculous. That year, the richest 1% actually paid 34%, more than twice what Sharpton wanted them to pay. He barely reacted when I told him. They're already paying 34%.
No, I think that if you deal with the quality of their lives.
He quickly changed the subject. He never would admit how far off he was. Today, the top 1% pay more, 35% of the income tax. Of course, the rich could pay as much as Europeans pay. But what's the result? It's not good. Innovation doesn't happen. Unemployment's high. Young entrepreneurs leave. Worse, big European government encourage Europeans to be dependent on government, and that's left them neither rich nor happy. And now some of their governments are broke and they can't pay the pension and health benefits they'd promised. When government takes your money and tries to create equality, most everyone becomes poorer and less free. As government grows, individual liberty shrinks. That's not fair. Opportunity is much more important than equality, and fortunately, there is still opportunity in America. Despite our high taxes, bureaucracy, and government-run schools, most Americans are not trapped in poverty. Researchers at Harvard and Berkeley found 64% of kids born to the poorest fifth of families rose to a higher income group. 11% moved all the way from the bottom fifth to the top. The rich aren't guaranteed their place at the top either. 66% of those born to the richest fifth of families fell from that group, and 8% fell all the way to the bottom. Opportunity requires allowing people to spend their own money and take their own risks. Instead of talking about fairness, it would be better if we talked about justice, respecting other people, respecting their freedom and their belongings. Real fairness requires limiting government power. That's our show. See you next week for a new episode again in our new time slot, Fridays on FBN.